Hey, Matt.
Yes.
Sorry, this is Alex. Do you want us to, like, are we going to do introductions, or do you want us to just put our names and whatever in the chat or something like that?
Yeah, I'll have a couple slides to introduce each of you. And Alex, I think you're going to go third right after Christina goes.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll definitely get to the introductions later on. But thanks for hopping on.
Yeah, sometimes they take longer than they should. So, you know, I wasn't sure if you had them built in or not. So
No, you're good.
I'm going to put it in the chat too, just to be,
Sure,
you know, a jerk about it. Thanks.
And feel free to hop on the Menti too and take the survey for everybody that's joining now. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes.
And just want to say hi to everybody as well. I'm seeing a lot of friends' names in the attendee list. So good to see everybody.
I think we had about 21 folks RSVP. Yes, we tried a new Evite, which I can talk about later in the housekeeping. That way it sends you the reminder with the link, and it also keeps track of who attends. So we have a better system on the back end, so to keep people informed about upcoming opportunities and things like that. So thank you all for bearing with us as we kind of figure out the best method to keep everybody connected for the working group. We'll go ahead and get started in a couple minutes. So let's see if any other responses have come in. Looks like a few people have already responded, and I don't know why it's already set the answer up unless the survey ran out, but it looks like 7 of y'all participated on the Menti just to kind of get used to it. And it certainly seems like we have a clear winner. And that's actually the correct answer. 30% of the greater Kansas City region population reports living in a highly walkable neighborhood, and that's in the Kansas City Physical Activity Plans report card. So there's a lot more information like that there. But I'll stop sharing my screen for just a second as we kind of get started. And I think we're going to have more people joining us as things get rolling. I'm also going to record the meeting just so folks can review it later on. But it looks like a lot of people's screens off. So if you're eating lunch, feel free to keep doing that if you want to eat lunch while we kind of get going. But I'll go back to sharing my screen. But we're excited to have a great conversation today on some policies and initiatives. So I'm going to switch back to sharing my screen, and I think people will be hopping in as we get going. So we'll start with housekeeping just to kind of let more folks join us. But the goal of today's meeting is really to kind of go through the theme of policies and initiatives as it relates to physical activity in parks and infrastructure. This is a meeting theme that was requested at the February kind of quarterly meeting. We'll talk about the differences between the regular meetings and the quarterly meetings. But Laura Steele from BikeWalkKC helped lead the infrastructure sector, and Jen Jutt from KCMO Parks and Rec helped lead the parks and recreation sector. And so a few months ago, they decided to join up and kind of share a joint presentation for reasons like today, where policies and initiatives overlap in both infrastructure and park spaces. It makes a lot of sense to talk about that. So we're excited to have today's topic be on policies and initiatives. And that was something that was a top priority amongst the participants from our February meeting who said, let's talk about this as the #1 thing. And so we're excited to have some folks here sharing a little more. I have a couple things to get through just on housekeeping. First off, just know that the meeting's being recorded, so anybody can reference it in the future, and we'll share meeting recording links in our PAPI newsletter. We'll share a link to that as well. And it's just a monthly newsletter that goes out sharing some of the news that's very relevant to this topic of physical activity in parks and infrastructure across the greater Kansas City region. I know there's a lot of stuff going on right now, so it's an interesting time to stay abreast of all this stuff. We also have a couple of things coming up that I want to chat with y'all about. But before we do, if you all could just kind of, as a working group, help sort of shape the focus of this working group. I think this is a guideline from the CDC on what policies and initiatives should the PAPI working group be focused on. These are broad policies and initiatives relevant to physical activity. And if you go to menti.com on your cell phone, you can participate, but this will give us some guidance on specifically what types of policies and initiatives should this working group focused on physical activity in parks and infrastructure kind of focus on. This might help guide different groups to invite to present at meetings, or if there's opportunities for folks to join in. The way the Menti works is it's a participatory budgeting tool, so you get to add points to any of the categories. And when you're done adding your points, you can go ahead and hit submit. So if you want to put all 100 points on activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations, you are more than welcome to. If you want to focus more on other things, you can distribute the points as you see until you spend 100 points. So have some fun with that. But this will be a really good reference point for this working group, just to think about what types of policies and initiatives in the future should this working group be aware of or taking a look at. So feel free to complete that. Hopefully we'll see some responses come in here in a little bit, but as we're getting started, I know folks are going to be looking at some other things. So I'll check back in on that in a second. Just in terms of housekeeping, these are quarterly meetings, these are regular meetings. In May, we will have a quarterly meeting. So the next meeting will be at the end of the month, same time, 12:30 to 2 p.m. on the last Wednesday of the month. The intent of those meetings is to really kind of just open it up. It's not going to be like the ones today where there's presentations. It's much more kind of ad hoc, whatever issues or conversations are rising to the top. And we'll have an opportunity to kind of demonstrate what that could look like, because in May, there is a cross-sector conversation with the Healthy Schools Work Group. They have been very interested in meeting with a lot of people who are involved in the built environment, in physical activity in parks and infrastructure, whether that's joint use agreements with schools and tracks, or safe routes to school programs, or any of those types of projects. There's a whole working group like this one in Healthy Schools, and they really want to have a cross-sector conversation to align some of the things that they've been talking about in terms of curriculum and physical activity in school settings and with students, with some of the work that the group here today and those of us that we're kind of coordinating with might be able to benefit from that cross-sector conversation. So it's meant to be really open-ended, but there's an opportunity today to kind of guide that. In addition to that conversation, it'll also help us start to think through what other themes might we talk about in a June and July meeting. So these are just a few examples. If y'all have any suggestions, feel free to add them in the chat on the Teams. The Menti also offers some Q&A options at the bottom of each question, but you can, add your thoughts to how we might see different projects, different programs, whether it's community recreation opportunities or examples of community leadership in parks and infrastructure for physical activity. There's a lot of variety of things we could talk about. And so this quarterly meeting is kind of a check-in to see what's rising to the top and what do we want to talk about. I'm going to jump back over to review how people have answered, and it doesn't look like I've gotten any responses yet. So is that not right, or am I doing it wrong?
I submitted, so I mean, you should have at least.
Oh, there we go. It just needed to load. So thank y'all. So just Alex, because you hopped on and said something. What do you think when you see this chart? Because you are a policy type of guy, and we'll have you present later on. But activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations. What does that mean for you in your role?
So that means creating opportunities, and helping fund those. So that's working with local jurisdictions to, there's something a phrase that's been used in the past that planners love, TOD, transit-oriented development. I've heard other ones called trail-oriented development. And I'm also thinking that, another one that's really important is access to parks. And I've seen that in parks master plans in recent years too. So that access, having a great park is a wonderful amenity for any jurisdiction to have or any community to have. But if they have to drive all the way to get to it because they can't walk to it or they can't bike to it, then that's a big problem. So when I see something like that, that's parks in particular, but just, I'm thinking, central business districts, downtowns being connected to the suburbs and beyond. I'm thinking about, things like that, modal access, sorry to use a jargon term, but, modal access, access for as many modes of transportation as we can, possibly create that are safe and, friendly for as many types of people as there are out there in the world is kind of the overarching goal for me.
Well, that was a very good answer off the cuff, so I appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into that. So just it's interesting to see the two most highly voted on choices in terms of how y'all would allocate your time is looking at activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations and access to places for physical activity. I think that's kind of speaking to what you're talking about too, Alex. And, it's just interesting to see the different types of policies and initiatives the folks on this call are interested in looking more into. So thank you all for participating. So I have another question real quick, and this is just, I'll leave this one up for a minute. But when we meet with the Healthy Schools Working Group, if you have any ideas or thoughts, if there's anything that comes to mind, please feel free to add it in the Menti. It could be one-word answers. It could be a sentence. If there's a specific thing that I know Emily Meisen-Sebelius, who's my colleague at Weighing In, she coordinates with the Healthy Schools Working Group. Please feel free to answer if there's a specific thing that you're burning to, is it PE? Is it recreation time with kids? Is it recess? Like those types of things. How might joint use agreements support that to get walking trails at schools? That'll help bring some resources to that meeting next month. So it's not just a conversation, but there might also be a little bit of a focus on specific things that y'all are interested in as well. So for the other last thing I was going to mention is that on the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan website, there is I'm going to pull up my screen right now, a new feature that if you all are looking at promoting things in the future, we tested this out. The Healthy Schools Group said, we really would like a bike month page. BikeWalkKC has done an incredible job on this in the past. MARC has done an incredible job in this past. It was kind of a challenge to put it together at the last minute. But we just use the links that go back to BikeWalk, go back to Mid-America Regional Council, go back to Ride KC Bike System. And so there's an email blast that went out. None of this takes away or replaces anything that's already happening, but it's a chance for the KCPA plan to kind of bring some of these shared resources together, whether it's from school partners or in the physical activity built environment space with trails or complete streets. And so Bike Month is in May. In fact, I think May 5th is Bike to School Day. But that's an opportunity for this group to start to think about, are there other types of events and programs that might benefit from having like a one-stop shop to have resources. And we're still figuring out what it means on Weighing In to have our website be used in that way, but it seemed like a really easy request to knock out, and we're excited to have that tested out. So if y'all have anything like that coming up and you think, man, wouldn't it be great to have something featuring physical activity, let us know, and we're happy to work with y'all on that. So the last question I have for you, this is great, by the way. I know I'm kind of going back and forth, so thank y'all for the patience, but looks like some of the topics already, safe routes to school comes up a lot. How can government agencies partner better? How do kids feel safe? That's a really great question. Scholarship program to help families get funding, after school program. Like this is the kind of stuff that we'll bring to the table when we meet in May with the Healthy Schools Work Group. And these might be, a way that we do it. It might be through breakout rooms or topics of conversation. So these types of suggestions are gonna help frame that conversation a little bit, but really it'll be open-ended for both whoever participates on the park and infrastructure side and also on the school side to kind of try to answer some of these questions and see what opportunities are available to get some work done on them. The last question, and I'm going to go to, is just a simple one. We have a couple of presentations today, and I'll introduce them here in a second, but they're on this issue of policies and initiatives. And so if you could just take a minute and give us a kind of a sense of how familiar you are with each of these, whether it's Complete Streets ordinances or the Vision Zero initiative, PIAC, as it's known, is the Public Improvements Advisory Committee. BPAC is a group that Alex runs, Bike Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and then Surface Transportation Projects. And so these are some of the things that, you know, I'm assuming will get touched on in our conversation today, but I just want to kind of gauge where you all are at in terms of your knowledge and awareness. I'm completing it too, so I'm trying to think through how familiar I am with some of these things. So this will give some context to our presenters. It looks like Complete Streets people are somewhat familiar with. Vision Zero, maybe a little less. PIAC and BPAC are kind of two committees that I know about a little, but you know, maybe half the room knows about. And then Surface Transportation Projects. Alex, you'll be able to take us home with a very interesting insight into STP, and I imagine you're the person who answered with a 10 out of 10 on that one. So I think you might have skewed the average weighting even then. So there's probably a lot of people interested in learning about STP. So thanks for participating all. And I'll just make a quick introduction. Laura is going to actually help introduce the conversation on Complete Streets and Vision Zero with Lati at BikeWalkKC. The second conversation will be with Christina, Hoxie, and Jen. I know can help kind of talk because PIAC does relate to parks at times, and then I'll chat with Alex about the scoring criteria for surface transportation projects and how the Bike Pedestrian Advisory Committee influences that. So I'll stop sharing my screen here in a second, but Laura, feel free to take it away. And for those of you, might be your first meeting. Generally, the first 10 minutes are the presentation, and the second 10 minutes are generally just time for Q&A, discussion. Please feel free to use the Menti as well. Your questions can pop up there or in the chat, but at least in the Menti, we can keep a record of them a little bit easier. But feel free to ask questions for the second 10 minutes, and you're welcome to keep your screens off if you'd like. But we'll try to have an open conversation with each of the groups and be wrapped up before 2 o'clock. And if you'd like to stay on after that to kind of, if something you heard sparked a question or conversation, feel free to stay on and chat with somebody you might have heard speak or somebody you want to catch up with. That's fine too. We'll try to be done before 2 o'clock, but it gives about 20 minutes to each of the presenters. So I will stop sharing my screen and let Laura go ahead.
Okay, so everybody forgive me as sharing on Teams is not something I am fluent in. So Matt, how do I do this? I literally was just Googling how do I share my screen in Teams. You're muted.
There's a box in the top right corner by leave. Don't hit leave. Hit the share content box. Control-Shift-E shortcuts it.
Say that again, because I don't have anything in my upper right corner. I see Allison Smith's smiley face on her cuticle. That's what's in my upper right corner. Look over your other shoulder, Allison.
Do you see? Can you hit Control-Shift-E on your keyboard?
It didn't do anything. I'm on a Mac, so do I need Command-Shift-E?
Well, I will say everybody can present, and I can pull up the slides if you can put a link to them in the chat. So if that's easier.
If we all can present.
Yeah, there is a button that should be up there near the video and mic button somewhere. There's a box with an arrow pointing up. But if that's not working for
you. Okay, it's on the bottom.
Ah. Do you see it? You got the Shero?
I do, but I don't know how to put anything in it. Everybody, I so apologize for the technical difficulties. Maybe we could play some STP while we're waiting, because I don't know quite how to share.
Here, how about this? I got it pulled up.
So I'm closing my share tray.
Okay. All right. Tell me when you're ready for me to advance the slides.
There we are. Thank you, Matt, so much. So, hello, everybody. My name is Laura Steele. I'm the Director of Education at BikeWalkKC. And as we've already identified, not very good with teams. I have with me today Lati Horton. She is one of our staff members here at BikeWalkKC, and she's going to go over Complete Streets and Vision Zero, share some information. So I'm going to go ahead and Lati, if you're able to speak and help identify when moving forward with the slides, I will turn it over to you. And anything further you would like to introduce for yourself, Lati, please do so.
No, I think that's fine. You can go to the next slide. Okay, once again, my name is Lati Horton, and I serve as the community ambassador for BikeWalkKC. And as you can see on the slide, it shows what our mission is, which is to redefine our streets as places for people to build a culture of active living. You can go to the next one. This presentation seeks to answer 3 questions. What are complete streets? What is Vision Zero? And how do these align? You can go to the next slide. So first, we need to ask ourselves, what are complete streets? The short answer is the complete streets are streets for people. According to the National Complete Streets Coalition, complete streets are designed and operated to enable safe access for all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, and transit riders of all ages and abilities. For example, examples of complete streets can be found in both temporary and permanent installation in communities of all sizes throughout the region. The project in this picture is of Armour Road here in the city. It's a complete street project in North Kansas City, and it operates, which is separate from KCMO, sorry, which is has a population of about 4,200. You can go to the next slide. With the basic idea of what complete streets are, let's now answer the question of what is a complete streets policy. The idea is that the policy more or less is meant to act as a filter, ensuring that projects and other opportunities to improve the built environment consider and include elements which support the mobility needs of all road users, not just drivers. This happens over time. Complete streets can't happen overnight. Instead, the idea is to take advantage of the opportunities as they arise. As such, you'll often see policy notes that projects should be considered and implemented with planned changes, such as major repairs, reconstructions of a given streetscape. They're not all the same, so not all policies are the same. I can speak to this a little more in the question and answers if need be, but when working with communities to help them draft and adopt policies, we encourage communities to adopt ordinances rather than resolutions. Ordinances are stronger and tend to ensure better outcomes over time. Next. So what does a complete street project look like? Let's consider the Gillum corridor and KCMO. Aligned with other efforts, this project has aligned with the planned resurface of the road beforehand, and this helped to make the project easier to implement and cut down on cost. Multimodal facilities, which are elements of the improved corridor, included traffic calming, improved pedestrian crossings, and improved bus stops and upgraded traffic signals. The first two-way cycle track in the city. And the possible catalysts are particularly for cyclists. The project could be a catalyst for more projects further south in the trolley track trail, as well as possible east-west improvements on streets like Linwood. So what is Vision Zero? With the understanding of complete streets, we can now ask what Vision Zero is, and it's a commitment to safe streets for everyone. Next slide. The definition comes from the Vision Zero network, the primary organization that works to help communities adopt and implement strategies related to Vision Zero. Let's consider this from a health standpoint. And the disease of a community is traffic violence, with symptoms of crashes, injuries, and fatalities. then we can understand Vision Zero as the prescription of remedies to help the community. Next slide. While there are a number of different ways that Vision Zero can manifest itself as a y'all forgive me, municipal policy as its core, the concept is guided by 4 key elements. First of all, it's engineering, because so much of what ails our transportation systems are shortcomings of the built environment. We need to focus on building better streets, which is where engineering comes in. This can cover a multitude of interventions, including lane configurations, signals, lightings, and even natural elements such as trees and other plants. Second would be education. It also helps to look for ways to educate the public about Vision Zero. Ensuring understanding means ensuring ease, and ease not only contributes to a safe environment, but can help to make advocates out of users as well. Third, encouragement. Given the recent spate of high-profile interaction between by POC individuals in the police, Vision Zero as a whole has moved away from enforcement, instead emphasizing more encouragement. This means finding ways to encourage people to behave differently in the transportation system. And lastly, equity. Informing all of the 3 previous elements is the need to ensure equity is in the implementation of the policies. In the most basic terms, what this means is a commitment to establish inclusive and representative processes, as well as equitable outcomes by ensuring measurable benchmarks to provide safe transportation options for all road users in all parts of the city. Sorry, next. With better understandings of each of these concepts, let's now explore how they align with one another in the KCPAP. Sorry. First, what's the connection between complete streets and Vision Zero? Inform one another. We can understand complete streets is what we want to achieve, and Vision Zero is how we achieve that. Elevate, so we need to elevate needs in multimodal users. While these sorts of improvements will make everyone safer, including drivers, we also need to see this as an opportunity to shift away from the dominant car culture, which exists in our society. We haven't prioritized the needs of road users who don't rely on cars, and that is the cost, and that's cost us in a number of ways. Also, few communities have both for now. More communities in the region have complete street legislation on the books, and that remains the case for now. The Vision Zero efforts in KCMO are being monitored by other communities, but there have also been conversations with elected officials and city staff elsewhere to begin moving in a similar direction. Next. There are a number of ways these policies align with the KCPAP, but there are 3 connections with the strategies in particular I'd like to highlight. Strategy 8, data. Collecting data to better improve policy is an important piece of Vision Zero. Many communities identify high crash or high injury corridors to determine where to focus resources to create a safer built environment. Strategy 10, design. The incorporation of active design principles is more aligned with complete streets. This typically manifests in policies where design guidelines are often referenced for staff to consult as they explore ways to improve the built environment for greater physical activity. And lastly, strategy 13, which is funding. Sustainable funding is also a byproduct of these efforts. In KCMO specifically, this has begun to manifest in the annual budget. Starting next year, a dedicated line item of funding will be set aside for the implementation of both complete streets and Vision Zero. So lastly, does anyone have any questions?
All right, so I'll stop sharing my screen.
So Lottie, thank you so much. So she covered a lot right there. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, both Lottie and I would be happy to answer. Matt, I want to make sure that we are okay on our time, because if questions are showing up in the chat, happy to answer those that way, especially if we need to move on to the next presentation.
Sure, and there are a couple of questions in the chat on the Menti. Again, if y'all are using the Mentimeter, you can use that to ask questions there, and that'll give us a chance to keep a track of them as well. So there's 2 questions that have come through. For Complete Streets, how are community members brought to the table during the planning and implementation process?
Lottie, do you want to take this one or me?
We can kind of tag team.
I'll let you go first.
We are doing a lot of outreach with different neighborhood leaders and things like that right now, and we're trying to always find ways to reach out and kind of figure out what people want in aspects for their community. So overall, just trying to make sure we're hearing what the community wants and educating different associations on what Complete Streets are and Vision Zero are, so that they can be well informed and contribute to changes that happen in their area.
Great. There's 2 more questions. One was, how has the pandemic affected Complete Streets and Vision Zero?
It has kind of put a pause on some things. We just have been focusing a little bit more on a little bit of like other policies at the moment. Like, I don't have the detail. Laura, do you want to kind of?
I was just going to say, you know, I think one benefit of the pandemic was, you know, the increase of people who were out using their streets to be active. It was kind of, for a lot of people, the only choice in terms of places to go to be physically active. And so I think, you know, that started to draw more attention to the state of the built environment in different neighborhoods and really make people aware, you know, this might not be supporting my choice to be physically active here in a safe manner. And so, you know, I think that, you know, it's, one, it kind of opened up that for a lot of communities, but 2, you know, there was a lot of other high priorities that were coming out due to the pandemic. And so, you know, there's, again, a lot of momentum around Complete Streets and Vision Zero by virtue of what we went through in the pandemic, but also the ability to focus on that with the dedication that it needs to get the community support around it, the municipal support around it, you know, has been kind of a slower process just because there's been other priorities due to the pandemic coming out. That's what I experienced in my community. And so, yeah, that's what I'd say.
Great. And there's one more question in the Menti. How can we be involved in implementation? I know that there's the infrastructure action team in Kansas City, Kansas. What about Kansas City, Missouri?
Yes. So, Lottie, do you want to take that one?
You got it.
I was going to say, you know, getting in contact with the BPAC group. And right, Alex, are you speaking more? No, you're talking about STP projects, but the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. You know, I think that would be another great place. I'm not sure, and Alex, maybe you can answer this a little bit more, but the Vision Zero task force. I don't know if there's a way to contact members of that if you want to know more information about the process of that or where they're at, or lend your voice to part of that process. In KCMO, those I think might be 2 options. Again, Alex, you may have a little bit more insight on that behalf.
You know, in terms of the Vision Zero progress that's being made, I would recommend, and I can look it up and throw it in the chat, but I don't have it readily available, but Maggie Green, the Public Information Officer for the Public Works Department in Kansas City, Missouri, has been, you know, actively involved, especially since she returned from maternity leave, and has been really terrific in kind of, you know, attending the meetings, synthesizing the material, getting it ready for council, etc. And so actually I have her coming to our BPAC meeting on May the 12th, Wednesday, May the 12th. Our meeting starts at 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock? 1:30. And she's going to be actually talking about that very subject for the BPAC. So you can certainly reach out to her, or you can reach out to me. I can put my own email address in here, and I can add you to our mailing list for the MARC BPAC, and you can attend that meeting and any others that you would care to.
I'll add one more just question to wrap up with this topic. I know Michael Kelly, who just went on paternity leave, helped the infrastructure action team in Wyandotte County put together their complete streets ordinance using this complete streets ordinance template. And so I don't know, Lati or Laura, how familiar you are with the template that he created, but this is something that was developed and was used to kind of tailor the idea of a complete streets ordinance. And I highlighted a couple sections about the early definitions and the language about the committee that is involved. But I'm curious to know if this answers some of the questions about how community groups can be participating and whether or not this type of effort can extend to some of the other parts of Kansas City more broadly, not just KCK or KCMO.
Yeah, so kind of with what Matt is showing right here, within that template, it does have a section that speaks about kind of organizing your own BPAC group, Bike-Ped advisory group, and it lists a diverse range of stakeholders as a recommendations to have on that committee, just so that you're making sure to hear everybody's voice. And I would say if your your community or whatnot does not have its own complete streets or Vision Zero work being done, reach out to your elected officials, and let them know that you want to see policies and budgets and money behind infrastructure improvement projects to support biking and walking. I know that within my community, Westwood, Kansas, our comprehensive plan that was adopted in 2017, we also had a strategic plan that wasn't formally adopted, but that came first in 2016. A lot of the common threads throughout there are the demand for a walkable, bikeable community. And so, making sure that if there's even supportive documents or previous, things that have been adopted by your local community, support those, that you're bringing those to the forefront, saying, hey, through community input, we've identified we want biking and walking, as well as, let's stay accountable to that. In my community, the comprehensive plan got put on the shelf. And so a lot of what, the work that we do in Westwood comes back to, well, this was the community input. They said they want this, and it fits right in line with complete street strategies and policies, as well as Vision Zero.
Great. And Alex, I saw the hand raised as well.
Trying to turn it off now. Okay. So I know we've got other speakers and other things going on, so I'll be brief, but the Mid-America Regional Council did a Vision Zero Summit last year. We were going to do it in person, obviously, and then, things changed. So we ended up doing it online over, oh gosh, I guess it was about 3 or 4 weeks time. We split it up into different sessions on different days. And we recorded every one of those sessions. And it was a fee that we charged at the beginning. Laura was a speaker, for example, for one of our sessions. And I am going to go ahead and put the link in the chat. Now, yeah, people had to pay for it, but we really didn't charge all that much. We charged $10, and it's been about 6 months at this point, so I don't feel too bad about this. There are some really, actually, I think they're all fantastic recordings. Our beginning keynote, we were not on the ball. That was our very first session, so we started it after she had started. But every single one of them after that is the full thing. There are some really excellent speakers. A lot of them are local. Some of them are from, surrounding states. And then we had even a panel with some folks that already have Vision Zero ordinances in place. It was Austin and Boulder, Colorado, were the two that we, let me go ahead and put that in so you can start taking a look at it. So there's all the sessions are recorded and put on this web page. It's I don't mind if you share it too far and wide. I really like to keep it in-house as much as possible, but if you have some colleagues that might benefit from watching one or several of these, and it kind of went all over the gambit of you know, gamut, I guess I should say, you know, what local jurisdictions did, what states did, you know, all kinds of, and all sorts of topics, dealing with the data side of it, dealing with other things. It's really, I think it would be a really helpful resource. There's a ton of recordings, so, you know, take your time, enjoy them, and hopefully they're of some benefit to the people here. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll make sure to put that in our Bike Rack newsletter so folks can check it out later on too. Good transition, I think, to Christina and sharing a little bit about PIAC, but I'll pull up a slide real quick just to show y'all the infographic she sent, and then Jen, feel free to kind of jump in after she presents. But Christina, if there's something specific you want to speak to, let me know, but I was just going to pull up your slide.
Sure, thanks. So I loved getting the question on the agenda, like, what is a PIAC? It is a mostly nocturnal urban creature here in KC-Mo. We're an odd breed, but it is a standing city committee that stands for Public Improvements Advisory Committee. So who are we? We're citizens or residents that are appointed by each council person. So there are 12 of us. It's a volunteer committee position. And our primary function is to solicit citizen input and make recommendations for both the citywide budget and the neighborhood portions of the capital budget. So what does that mean we do? We hold public hearings during the summer in each district. So there are 2 public hearings for each district, and starting last year during the pandemic, these were virtual. This year there'll be 1 virtual and 1 in person at a large, completely socially distanced, spaced out place for folks to meet. These start in the summertime because the applications are due every year on August 31st. So what are the kinds of projects that are eligible for PIAC funding? These are public projects, so they have to be on public land. They can have to do with stormwater, flooding, bridges, streets and roadway improvements, municipal building improvements, community centers, parks, street lighting, traffic calming, park facility improvements of all types, ball fields, swimming pools, monuments. So these come from everyone from a resident who's responding to seeing cracked sidewalks on their block to larger service-oriented nonprofit organizations who are increasing connections and programming for their community and safe streets. Like I said, these come from all sorts of individuals, but what helps to increase the chances of getting the projects funded, because bear in mind that between all 6 districts, we usually get around 1,000 applications every year. So each district, there are 2 PIAC representatives, and we're evaluating all of the applications for our district. Jim Wanzer and myself are the PIAC representatives for District 4. I'm Councilman Bunch's representative. And so what we apply is a very methodical strategy. We look at whether there's collaboration among neighborhoods or community partners to create projects. We look at whether there's leveraged resources. So there's usually a higher priority put on projects that can demonstrate additional sources of funding. Demonstration of viability. So when a project has a great chance of being completed and how that follow through happens, and where the community support is where the departmental and organizational support is. To come to those neighborhood hearings or to call us. I get calls throughout the year from residents throughout the 4th district wanting to talk about their projects and the likelihood of it getting funded. But at those neighborhood hearings, those public hearings during the summer, that's also a great opportunity opportunity to speak about your project idea and also to hear what other folks in the 4th District are presenting and promoting as well. And to dream big, to really create a comprehensive approach in your PIAC application that addresses safety, that addresses a network of connections for your community, that enhances quality of life for your community. And since it is such a competitive process, with each district getting approximately between $4.1 to $4.3 million each year to dedicate to these projects, it gets very competitive with over 1,000 applications. So if you don't get the funding for that project the first year, keep applying, apply every year, continue to talk to us about your projects, and your council members getting their support is also very key, and to continue to apply. We are starting to modernize the process a little. I've only been a PIAC rep for 2 years. I was brought on when Councilman Bunch came on. And during that time, we've started to work with BPAC to create mapping each year of all the project applications, categorizing them by each city department that they fall under. So we can not only create a sense of accountability for where in our district projects are getting funded and start to create synergies between projects, but also to track that funding year to year to year. We're also creating a more modernized process for applications. And I'll put in a few links into the chat here where you can find more information on the city's website, where you can download your application, where you can see the upcoming schedule for those public hearings. And also if you don't know which district you're in, the map of city districts, so you can find out which one to go to and who your representatives are. One other thing that's important to note about this funding program, this is part of the capital budget. This is not a grant program, and it's not a reimbursement program. So there's a process by which you put your idea forward. It gets taken on by a city department to do cost estimation for, and then it goes through an adoption process with the city budget. So that's the annual cycle of how those applications come through. So then the funding recommendations come back to those residents that have submitted applications right after the budget's approved at the end of March every year. So in April, that's what you're seeing on the screen right now, is when the notices are received by the applicant. So in April, you'll find out whether your application was approved for funding or not. And then the city starts to plan those projects, but in the department. So it's not on the applicant's shoulders to plan their projects or how to budget that funding. It's all held within the department. But the PIAC representative's responsibility is to maintain contact with those applicants and encourage and solicit that input and even sometimes liaise communication between the departments and between the applicants to make sure it's a smooth and fluid process. So those are some thoughts about PIAC. That's a little snapshot of what it looks like. Any questions on that?
Thank you, Christina. And Jen, feel free to get us started. And once you're ready, I can pull some questions in from the Minty if there are any.
That'd be awesome, Matt. Hi, Christina. Thanks for coming. My name is Jen Jett. I'm the superintendent of community services at KC Parks. I was just curious to know, you had mentioned each district gets a certain amount of the capital budget allocated to give out every year for PIAC funding. Do you know on average how many total projects are funded every year? Like, what's the approach on how to kind of disperse that?
It's a little bit different for each district. Each representative or each district representative, those duos, have their own way of making priority projects. I wouldn't say that it's consistent district to district. I can speak to the way Jim and I do it. Jim and I have been allocating for the last 2 years at least $750,000 for sidewalk projects alone, and then looking at parks, looking at storm, looking at street projects and traffic calming in separate categories, but trying to find neighborhood synergies to bring those together. This last year was a really tight focus on safety, pedestrian safety, bicycling safety, and getting people to community amenities and assets from where they were, into bus stops, to schools, connected networks of sidewalks. So that we try to make sure that it's in neighborhoods that may not have gotten funding before. So it's not always the same folks, it's not always the squeaky wheel, and really trying to build up capacity in neighborhoods that we haven't heard as much from to get their applications in. So we really try to focus on those comprehensive network projects between organizations and neighborhood associations to create a set of projects that reinforce each other. So I think that overall last year, I think there were a total of 35 to 37 different applications that were able to be funded in District 4. I think it was slightly fewer the year before because there were some carryover commitments to projects previously. There were some times we'd say we can fund you $100,000 a year for 3 years. And so that was carried over in that first year that we were funding. So there weren't quite as many. I'd say there were 24 to 30 projects the previous year that got funded. But we're trying not to do that anymore. We're trying to look for those projects that can be accomplished in 1 year and really build momentum and quality in that year. And
right.
less development projects. Sorry.
No, you're good. We actually have a question from Allison Smith. Christina, do you track these projects on a central site for the public to see the work / projects being done, where we can go and see what's going on?
That is something, that's one of those modernization tactics that we're advocating for really strongly. Data KC has been enormously helpful in helping us to set up that map. And I can share a link to that map that we started with last year. This is not something that has happened before. So really, I think that it is incredibly important to be transparent with the public about how these funds are being used and how we're being responsive to the residents who are making these applications. So it's something that I'm pushing hard on with my fellow 4th District Representative, Mr. Wanzer, and with our chair, Lauren Ryman. But yes, I will send that map so you can see what we're working on, and lots more improvements to come.
So there are a couple more questions in the Menti chat. Specific to this group, do PIAC projects consider physical activity when y'all are making decisions?
I would say that we are considering safety and connectivity even more than physical activity. But I think they're joined pretty closely. So if there are some criteria that you think that we should be considering in addition to safety and connectivity, I can certainly talk with my council member and my fellow PIAC rep about including those in our criteria. And we do get together as a large group of 13, including our chair, at least 3 times a year. So that's when we start to have conversations about joint cross-district projects. as well as these kinds of criteria that we should all be considering. So I would love to get your thoughts on how to incorporate more of this physical activity into our thinking process.
Well, that's a great segue once we get there, not yet, for Alex. I think you'll enjoy that part of Alex's talk. Another question that came in is, what are some examples of collaboration? You mentioned collaboration in your intro, that you've seen in successful PIAC applications.
So one that really stands out to me is the West Plaza neighborhood and the process that they went through to determine which sidewalks to prioritize in their neighborhood. As many of you may know, if you're a Kansas City, Missouri resident, there's enormous sidewalk problems, buckled sidewalks, hard to navigate in many, many neighborhoods. West Plaza went through a process internally with their neighborhood association and their board, and then a separate ad hoc committee to prioritize which streets, created that network of moving through their neighborhood and getting to public transit opportunities, parks, neighborhood schools, and the wider area around them. They submitted their application. We saw an opportunity to really create a difference there with this amount of funding, as well as provide them with some key traffic calming implementation that had been important to them for several years in a row as well. So we could combine those projects and work with a local business on an alley improvement as well. So then going back to the neighborhood with our representatives from Public Works, providing cost estimation, helped them to, again, continue to refine their process and really select very specifically those sidewalks and improvements that were able to be afforded with the budget, and then to see those through. So implementation occurred last year during the fall and was wrapped up this spring. During that time, there was also the Parks Department, the Forestry Services representative from the Parks Department did have to take some trees down. And that, so many of our neighbors and residents are really connected to their trees. It's such a defining characteristic of so many of our neighborhoods. So that raised an issue that we needed to address with additional collaboration, additional conversations to talk about why the trees needed to come out, and what species would be replacing them, and the safety issues involved in those decisions as well. Of course, a forester never wants to have to take a tree out. So that was just additional communication with that neighborhood, and now they've invited the whole team to attend one of their neighborhood meetings and give an update and give a little more clarity on what the tree species are going forward that the city's using in neighborhoods when they have to replace trees, and how they can plan their expectations for additional future projects in that way. So that's been kind of a model, not only for us as PIAC representatives, but also for our collaboration with the city departments and the neighborhood.
So there's two more questions that I want to just see if we can get to before we switch over to Alex. Just quickly, do you see cross-district collaboration for PIAC projects?
Yes, we do actually. When we went through our list, I'll be quick. When we went through our list, we saw opportunities for about 12 different cross-district collaborations. And so we had sidebar meetings with those district representatives. And especially in the 3rd district, we found 4 projects that we both agreed to make contributions to, of course, with the council members' recommendation as well, so that we could make those projects happen. And then there are some projects that are across all districts, citywide. So have at least 2, 3, or sometimes even 4 different districts contributing to make a project happen.
Great. And then the last question to get to, that was a good answer. What are the most common PIAC requests that you see come through?
Sidewalks. Absolutely, sidewalks. And then there are quite a few projects that come through for flooding. And those tend to get really, really tricky because quite often the biggest challenge is occurring on private property. So tracing that issue back to where it's coming from as a city or as a public infrastructure project can be very tricky. It can become a very large multi-million-dollar project. So then how do you parse it out to deal with the residents' biggest challenge, which can be a nightmare every time it rains, and has come from city policy and development patterns that have increased the strain on our city's stormwater system. So those become longer conversations, longer processes, and usually bigger projects to incorporate in the capital improvement plan. But those are the 2 major areas.
And just because I know you, Christina, what's your event coming up on Complete Streets planning? Aren't you doing a project on that this week?
Yeah. Yes, just starting on West Penway in the West Side neighborhood. So it's a small stretch of street, but a lot going on, right? So it's from 17th and Summit, 21st and Summit up to 17th on West Penway. So it goes by the library, the Irene Briuas Library, the Tony Aguirre Community Center, a large apartment complex that used to be an historic school. And it's right in the middle of this bustling, wonderful, strong neighborhood, West Side. And it also connects, it's a part of the Riverside Heritage Trail, of course. So it's a regional part of a regional network, also connected to Crossroads Business District, downtown, West Bottoms. It's just kind of a nexus of so many things. So really excited to start working on that with Wilson and Company and SWT Design and BikeWalkKC.
Cool. Well, thanks, Christina.
Thank
As
you.
a segue, because you mentioned the criteria, I'll kick it over to Alex. And Alex, I have one slide for you, but if you got anything you'd like to share, feel free. But I can pull up mine if you want me to.
You would go ahead. Go ahead. I didn't prepare anything. I wasn't sure how much time I'd have, so I didn't do anything for this meeting other than pull up the scoring criteria.
There's 2 things I'll pull up, and this is something we're going to talk about, I know, because you and I talked beforehand. This is the Surface Transportation Block Program scoring criteria, and it is an 8-page long list. And I won't go through every one in detail, but the one that I think is going to be interesting for this group is 2 criteria on public health and accessibility public health. So I'll stop there, but I just wanted people to see that there is a document that is the scoring criteria, and we can share that in the bike rack, and also as so long as Alex is willing to share. But it's a very good list of things, but something I think you'll be able to talk a little bit more about when you present now.
Ooh, yeah. Okay. So hi, everybody. My name is Alex Rotenberry. I'm a Complete and Green Streets planner here at the Mid-America Regional Council. So we're an 8-county organization covering 4 counties, each in Kansas and Missouri. We are the metropolitan planning organization for this area, which is to say that we deal a lot with transportation issues. You may have had an opportunity to work with me or one of my colleagues in the past or currently. Out of curiosity, Christina, is this a PSP project? Yep. Okay. So the project that she was just talking about is funded by MARC. So we do planning. We fund planning studies. We do all kinds of really interesting things. I focus more on active transportation. So, walking and biking and stuff like that. And so one of the things we do many, many things. One of the things that we do is that we are given federal transportation dollars, and we allocate those out to jurisdictions for the use of building transportation infrastructure. And so we give out several different kinds of federal funds. The highest dollar amount that we get, and the one that's the most popular, is the Surface Transportation Block Grant Funds, which used to be known by a couple other different names over different transportation bills that have been passed by the federal government, which is why we exist in the first place, is that MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, are required by federal statute in urbanized areas of 50,000 people or higher. And so many, that's why a place like Lawrence does have a MPO. The Flint Hills has an MPO near KSU. Jefferson City, St. Joe, Joplin all have MPOs. For ones that have a population threshold that's a little bit higher, around 200,000 people, that's where we start getting funds allocated directly to us in order to make in a competitive process for organizations. And by organizations, I mean cities, county, cities can apply for these funds and use them for transportation infrastructure or a couple other things. We also get funds called Surface Transportation Block Grant Set Aside. We prefer to use the old acronym because it was a lot easier to say, which is TAP funds, which used to mean Transportation Alternative Program funds, which were used exclusively for non-road related expenses. A lot of parks departments apply for them to build trails. They can be used to build, sidewalks. It itself used to be part of the Safe Routes to School federal pot of money before it got turned into TAP funds. It's a long history of acronyms and whatnot that I don't care to bore anyone with today. But needless to say, we get those funds, and then we get some for air quality. They're called CMAQ funds, congestion mitigation air quality funds. We get those because while we are in attainment for air quality, we've been kind of naughty in the past, and so we get funds to help mitigate our air quality problems that we have here in the region. So those are only given out to certain areas, not the full 8 counties that we are an MPO for. So that's kind of the background. It's technical, it's long, it's not particularly interesting, but I think it's necessary to kind of introduce that in order to kind of get to the topic that I wanted to bring before this committee today. And so what we do is we have a competitive process when we do any of those 3 federal transportation dollar applications. It's a competitive process. We have different ways that we score them. CMAQ gets its own funky way that we do it that has its own issues. But basically our staff kind of splits up the application and scores the projects based on a score sheet that we have produced that, in my opinion, is getting a bit dated. This is my first time doing it in 2020, and I was alarmed. Might be a little bit of a strong term, but when I start, and I've linked and put it in the chat at 134. The scoring sheet for the STP, that's the old name for the SDBG scoring criteria. The TAP ones are flawed, but they're exclusively for multimodal purposes. So I'm not as concerned with that. But when I started scoring the stuff for the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, whatever you want to call it, I use them interchangeably. There's these broad topics that are discussed, and what I'm been thinking is that I've been involved with the physical activity plan since Dr. Shook came and spoke to a different committee meeting at MARC. We've got so many, and he presented on this plan while it was still that must have been we were still meeting in person. It was last year, so I would guess it was in February or March of 2020 is when I first got hooked into this, and I was like, this sounds exactly like the sort of thing I do. So
yeah, Alex, it was the Mohawk meeting, and I got bumped because Dr. Archer had to give an emergency presentation on this thing called COVID-19 that hadn't yet made it to the city.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
So I guess it must have been March then, because we were shut down not too long after that.
Yeah, early March. Yep.
Right. And so, and I was like, this is the kind of thing that I do, on a daily basis, And so, I had that in the back of my mind as we started doing our scoring, and we have tried to do a quantitative methodology towards scoring projects based on a lot of criteria. One of my colleagues was on the call earlier. I don't know if he still is, but we have my colleague Tom Jacobs is on our environmental side of transportation and environment, and he has a number of different scoring criteria related to how projects might affect, watersheds or air quality or things along those lines, and that's an example. And for me, we break up the projects into different categories. So there's like a bridge category, exclusively just for bridges. If MoDOT or KDOT or something like that is building a bridge, or if a municipality is building a bridge, there's certain things we look for there. If they're building a Bike-Ped project or something like that, if they're building a complete street-like project, if they're expanding roadways, what are they doing for that? Things like that. And as I was kind of going, I was assigned my criteria and I started scoring it, and I found very quickly that they either misnamed or they were not really getting at the heart of the I think the purpose behind them. So Matt pulled up, and if you wouldn't mind doing that again, just that one
Sure.
larger example that you showed.
Sure.
It was classified through its name as I want to say, I don't remember actually. There we go. Transportation choices in public health. And so I noticed first right off the bat that okay, we're talking about public health. Transportation choices. I mean, first off, I'm not sure if those two things really belong together. And two, what are we actually looking at? And so looking at that, the first part is awarding 5 points. Out of 120 points, 10 total points is fairly significant. If it would be better if it was higher, but something like that. And so I can't remember which one I grabbed this one from. This is from the bridge one, I guess. So it's like, does the bridge address how many modes does it address? It's almost certainly going to address at least one with vehicular crossings, but have they provided space such as the Heart of America Bridge for other modes of transportation to cross it, And so, okay, well, that's choice. It's a mode choice, fine. And then talking about if it's barrier elimination, project improves a bicycle pedestrian connection. I found this to be incredibly nebulous, and this is essentially, the scoring criteria is about all the documentation I was given in order to score these projects, which will range from all sorts of projects, from road, expansion and inclusion of sidewalks to, we did have several bridge projects it really runs the gamut. We probably got about 80, 100 projects that were applying for these kinds of funds, and so, from jurisdictions across all 8 of our counties. And, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking like, I don't really, the mode choice, that's simple enough. Does it connect to other things? If they bothered to put that in their application, I might be able to figure something else like that out. Anyway, needless to say, long story short is that I was dissatisfied with the scoring criteria that we use for certain things. And since my bailiwick is active transportation, those are the ones that I have the gripes over. There were plenty on there that I'm sure other, my colleagues objected to or had, opinions on, but those really aren't what I do. So, I'm starting to think now, our scoring criteria, this is now the time to think about scoring criteria changes. We'll be starting the process back up again in January of next year. So, I mean, if it comes to, I have to take these before a couple committees and then they got to get approval. I mean, I really don't have all that much time if you think about it before December is upon me. That's just the nature of how my work goes, moving that far, thinking that far ahead and all the administrative parts that are, part of that. And so, I was thinking that this group might be a really interesting one to kind of bounce ideas off of, because, I mean, we're talking about, okay, transportation choices is one thing. Public health, it's completely a misnomer. There's no discussion, there's nothing scored here regarding public health of any kind. And I think, and I acknowledge the fact that public health is the same thing as saying transportation. It's a massively wide area of research and discussion and topics. And so, the thought being for me is ideally in an ideal world that I can refer to something else that I have not come up with and that I do not have to maintain, that we can use as some sort of thing for, because this is the whole point of the scoring criteria, right? Is to have cities consider these things when they're making their applications. When they're planning out a road project, we want it to be as accessible to as many people as possible. So if I wanted to say public health, again, a very wide subject matter to talk about, maybe, we talk about particulate matter and environment, so maybe that's not the way to go. Maybe air quality is addressed elsewhere. So I'm thinking, well, maybe something that could be discussed is, some sort of factor that can be looked at a map. So they want to put, Kansas City, Missouri wants to expand Gillum Road. I mean, I'm just pulling out of thin air here, but so they would have a map they could go to and they could look at what would they look at that I could provide to them that would make them consider, is what expanding the roadway, how would that affect the community around it, in a health sense? I mean, if we're talking about obesity levels, I mean, are we talking about, really there's a lot of things that could be discussed there. But it's something that I would love to have, that they would have to answer a question on and that I could score them on as well. And so I guess that's kind of, this is a big question, and you guys didn't get any prep time for this, so I understand if I may have to bring this back again, or we may have to, have an online conversation about this in a separate time. But I mean, is there, resources that I can use to get communities to start thinking a little bit more broadly than I want, there's congestion, however you may define the word. We define the word at MARC is essentially, if we look at congestion, it's really just a handful of interstates and maybe a couple of stretches, small sections of road. There's really not any serious congestion in our 8-county region on city streets. There may be some slow moving traffic at times during the day, but so we're pretty strict on roadway expansion. We're pretty harsh on that, and as well we should be. But
Alex,
we want. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, just because we're running out of time and we got about 10 minutes, and normally it's kind of open discussion, but I think you've kind of teed it up really well. I just want to get to the two questions that I saw come through in the Menti, because I think it'll help kind of maybe focus a little bit on this effort. The first one is, how are social and racial equity built into the project evaluation? The question was about PIAC and STP, but just in reference to what you presented, are social and racial equity built into STP that you're aware of?
No, I don't. I will, with the caveat of I doubt it. I will also say that I don't score the entire, project. I only score specific things on there, and I would say that the scoring criteria that I use does not. We use environmental justice tracks environmental justice being defined by the federal government as an area of, as a census tract that is a high percentage either living in poverty, and I think the definition of poverty is kind of left to the people defining the, so it could be 150% above, below poverty level, 200% below poverty level, etc. Or a census tract that is a majority minority population census tract. So those are the two categories. We do use environmental justice tracts to look at that. We look at transit accessibility.
Yeah.
But that might be the extent of, again, I'm not 100% sure. I did link it in the chat, so I mean, you might be able to find it in there as well, but I'm not aware.
That's helpful, and I see Christina is typing out a good answer, I'm sure. So that's helpful to see. And Blake has commented, and Andrea actually had a great question too. And this gets to the second question that came through on Minty. Andrea mentioned health impact assessments. The question was, how can this group best help on the scoring criteria?
I'm looking for ideas or collaboration with somebody to, I mean, ideally for me, I mentioned the map. I would love to have, to make a pitch towards making a change to the scoring criteria and having something that I don't have to manage, and hopefully the person who's suggesting it doesn't have to manage either. Something that would be specific enough to the region. I think I would prefer that to national data, but I would accept national data if that's all that's available. And I would love to agree on some sort of criteria. And then I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's childhood something, or if that's, just, adult levels of this or that, something that we can point to and say, like, making more roads is not the answer, to kind of discourage communities from just thinking like, well, I just want to make this 2-lane road to a 4-lane road. Why won't you give me the money? Be like, well, have you thought about your residents and the people that live along that street and that neighborhood? Have you considered them in that analysis? Right now, that answer is no. I mean, we asked them to cite plans where they've put this stuff. Ideally, those plans have gone through a public participation process. For those of you that have gone through a public participation process with cities, you know that is an incredibly difficult hurdle to achieve. So I wouldn't necessarily put all my chips on, something that's gone through a city council meeting or something that's gone through a planning process necessarily.
And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of comments in the chat. I think this has got people thinking about how to address it. I know we're going to run out of time here in a little bit, so I'm curious if it's okay. I will add in the newsletter all of the resources that everybody's listing. I think there's some really good links that everybody can check out. But I'm also curious if anybody on the call is interested. How do we this conversation seems to merit more time than we have available to discuss today. So is that something that this group wants to talk about as a working group meeting in the future, or is it something where the folks that are most interested kind of meet with Alex? I see a lot of people saying yes. So I think that answers, I'm assuming that's for the first part, which is have this group meet about it again and really kind of dig in. That could be something we do, but we'll make sure in the newsletter and in the notes for this meeting that all of that information is available, so people can have it. I think what I'm hearing, Alex, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this type of criteria could have a systemic influence in how all streets relate to physical activity in terms of walking to neighborhood parks, to neighborhood amenities. If a street needs to have more physical activity criteria, it might influence cities to submit applications with better connectivity. Is that what we're hearing?
That is my intention. To influence thinking by our cities, by our members, by any community in our 8-county region that is applying for federal funds through us, to have them at the bare minimum, at least, doing a little research and thinking about this, even if it's for 5 minutes to answer the damn question. The fact that we don't have anything like that now is something that I would like to change. Okay. And I mean, that's it's really tough for us as an MPO. We're a regional entity, but we don't by any means have any kind of authority over anything. So, I mean, the way that we can affect thinking, in my belief, is through something that they already want. They want this money in order to build something. And they're voluntarily putting themselves through a pretty rigorous application process as it is. I just want to make it a little bit more tailored for, thinking about things a little bit outside of what they might be thinking about already. They're thinking about, street levels of service. They're thinking about, I'm not sure what they're thinking about. I mean, I think they're thinking that, they only have to pay 20% out of the total cost of this big project, and it's a heck of a deal, and that they'll jump through any hoops in order to get that money that they have to. And I think this is a way to influence that thinking. So I think this is a powerful way to do it. I mean, we go through a committee process to kind of put the bow on this before we have to go. What we do is staff does the scoring, and then we meet in different committees, and the committees decide who is awarded the funds. But I can tell you that very few projects that score poorly are, they rarely get awarded any amount of funding. I mean, if they're very low scoring projects, they typically do not get awarded funds. So the score, while not the end all be all, because sometimes lower scoring projects do get awarded funds. That's just a kind of reality of, living in a committee structure. The higher the score projects typically get funding. So this is a way that we can affect that. So I will also say that timing is of the essence, Matt. So, meeting prior to the end of May might be a good idea.
So what I can commit to, just in support of this working group, is I'll get your STP translated to a Google Doc and share it with everybody that attended today's meeting or past meetings, so people can look at it, make comments, add thoughts, and then maybe send out some sort of doodle poll link for a special group of folks that really want to have this conversation. If y'all have any other suggestions on how to put that together, please feel free to add it. I hear what you're saying. Get it together before the end of May, so you have some time to work through the process. So Alex, I know Lottie dropped off earlier, but Laura with Bike Walk, and then Christina, thank y'all for taking the time to meet with us today. Y'all don't have to go home or stay home and log off, but feel free to open up and have a discussion. Whether it's about any part of what you heard today, I know we've always thought that the meeting after the meeting sometimes is the most valuable thing. So there's no more structure. If you just want to blurt out what you're working on or something you want to connect on, feel free.
I got another meeting, guys. So I really do appreciate everybody's time and getting those juices flowing and learning about the other things today. That was really helpful too. So thanks everybody, and I look forward to seeing what we can come up with. This is a collaborative process that I have high hopes for. So thank you.
And thanks, Alex. And I'll just add one more thing. Elizabeth Bodeger, our intern, she's with us only for a couple more weeks, but she did a great job summarizing all the links in the meeting notes. So you'll see this in a newsletter. We'll add you if you attended today's meeting just so you can check it out. But all the links in the discussion, there's a lot going on. So you can check in with it later at your leisure. But thanks for everybody that shared everything and took part in the Menti as well. So. All right.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah. Hey, Allison.
So if you wanted to do something like for Mark's question, if you create a group on Teams, you could post that in a chat topic and then everyone can go comment on it.
Ooh.
If you want.
So I'm hearing the suggestion to create a working group channel or team I'm wondering if that's Children's Mercy's team, because I could be the most influential in just adding people and connecting, and then put the files there and organize it that way. That's a heck of an idea. I hadn't thought of that. So I can look into what that takes. The one question I'll have is Children's Mercy sometimes has very particular rules on who gets invited into team spaces. So if it doesn't work in that setting, I think this group can adapt and evolve, but that's a really good suggestion.
That's what we've done for some other committees. But again, it's all been Johnson County government, not just a mixture, but we have gotten permissions to get some outside users on those committees as well. Okay. So it's all about your IT and restrictions and all that. So
I'll look into it. I know UG does that pretty well with their groups as well. I'm on a couple of Wyandotte County groups that I'm not a member of the city, but I get in access to it. And I saw Andrea is about to present youth health advocates to Rep Cleaver. So good luck if she's still on the chat. People are dropping off, so goodbye and have a good rest of your week. Yeah, thanks for sticking around. And Christina, I know you got to go, but I was just curious, did the criteria question that Alex talked about, did that kind of spark your interest on the same stuff with PIAC?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would love to create more consistency across the districts in what we're talking about and how we're making those decisions. Of course, each district has its unique characteristics and challenges, but to incorporate these ideas we're talking about here together today into that larger conversation is of great interest to me. So I'll stay plugged in.
I knew a little bit about what Alex was going to talk about, and I had a conversation with somebody else at Children's Mercy who does informatics. So she maps electronic health record data on GIS. Yeah. There might be the potential to build that kind of map that Alex was alluding to across the region that Children's Mercy has data for, but it's going to be a little bit of a lift to pull off quickly before things get kind of finalized on his scoring criteria world.
Yeah.
But
yeah. That's exciting.
I have a quick question for you, and I may not have the question fully formed in my head, so bear with me, but I'll try to be quick. In terms of any district council persons' priorities, and talking about scoring criteria and things like that, that seems always kind of like a shifting target then. So, I guess what weight does the district council person have, or is it based more on something objective that's hard to adapt and change, and maybe you mentioned that, I apologize. But I mean, PIAC is something I want to know way more about, because recreating something similar in other areas, I think would be interesting to kind of get into.
Yeah. I'm so glad to hear that. And because it is kind of a unique beast unto KCMO right now, but it's an exciting kind of democratic process to proliferate. In the 4th district, and I think you're right, it varies by council members. Some have, very specific thoughts on how to allocate this discretionary fund. Essentially, this is where they can have a pot of money to follow through on their priorities. But I'd say, all in all, the council members respect their PIAC representatives' recommendations, nice. Right? We're the ones that are spending the hours combing through every application, visiting with the applicants to clarify information, talking with the departments on budgetary questions, and then coming back to those council members with our recommendations, as well as, the big ideas of what's getting prioritized based on the patterns we're seeing from those applications. So it goes through a series of usually 4 meetings with the council members and the reps, and another 10 or 12 meetings just with the reps preparing for those meetings. So because there's always questions to come back to. But yeah, it's usually, and especially, it has been such a joy to work with Jim, because he's been doing this so much longer than I have, and he has such a memory for all 10 years of applications that he's been working on. So it's been great to learn from him as well. But the council members really do have a lot of respect for the recommendations that we put forth. And only occasionally will they say, you know, we've talked with that applicant and we just can't make that a priority this year, or bring another one up higher in the ranking because of other more holistic issues that Jim and I may not know anything about. So it's a collaboration for sure.
That's so cool. I'd love to pick your brain more about that, you know.
Happy to talk with you about it whenever.
Awesome. Well, thank you for presenting. It was good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
So Matt, I am going to jump off because I haven't been able to give much time to the Healthy Communities Leadership presentation that we're doing tonight. So I'm going to jump off.